Our game show was supposed to be light-hearted, but a single silent salute from an old man in the crowd ripped open a 70-year-old wound, halting our broadcast and revealing a story that defied all expectations. The camera's red light was my son, and the energy of the downtown crowd was the gravity that kept me in orbit. We were in the middle of taping a segment for my show, Street Smarts and Big Hearts, right in the heart of the city. The premise is simple. I find random people, ask them some trivia, and if they win, they get a cash prize that can genuinely change their week, maybe even their month. It's feel-good, it's fast-paced, and it usually runs like a well-oiled machine. My producer, Maria, is a wizard at managing the chaos, her voice a constant calming presence in my earpiece. "Okay, Steve, we're golden," she'd said just minutes before. "The lighting is perfect, the crowd is hyped. Let's get this one in the can before the sun shifts." My contestant was a young nursing student named Chloe, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and excitement as she stared at the wad of cash in my hand. The crowd was a tight semicircle around us, their phones up, recording, cheering her on. It was the exact kind of beautiful, controlled chaos that made for great television. I was in my element, feeding off the energy, my smile wide and genuine. "All right, Chloe," I boomed, my voice amplified by the mic clipped to my jacket. "For $500, a life-changing amount for any student buried in textbook bills, I need you to name the 3 branches of the U.S. government." She bit her lip, the gears turning in her head. The crowd murmured, a few people whispering the answer to their friends. It was a standard, easy-peasy question to get the ball rolling. But as Chloe opened her mouth to answer, my eyes drifted. It's a habit I have as a host, always scanning the periphery, looking for the next interesting face, the next potential story. And that's when I saw him. He was standing at the far edge of the crowd, away from the main crush of people, almost in the shadow of a large bronze statue. He was an old man, maybe in his late 80s, ramrod straight in a way that defied his age. He wore a simple windbreaker, nondescript slacks, and a worn-out VFW cap that sat on his white hair like a crown. He wasn't watching our show. His focus was somewhere else entirely. He wasn't looking at me or Chloe or the cameras. His gaze was fixed over our heads, aimed at the civic building across the plaza. I tried to pull my attention back to the show. Chloe was saying, legislative, executive, ... She was getting it. The crowd was cheering her on. This was the money shot. "That's 2, Chloe. 1 more for the cash," I encouraged, but my voice felt distant in my own ears. My focus was split. Something about the old man was magnetic, while our little bubble of television was loud, bright, and focused on a game. He was in a world of his own, a bubble of intense, silent reverence. His jaw was set, his brow furrowed not in anger, but in concentration. Then he moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. His right hand, gnarled with age and etched with veins that looked like rivers on a map, began to rise. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was a salute. Crisp, precise, his fingers perfectly straight and touching the brim of his cap. He held it there, his entire body a statue of respect, his old eyes locked on something I couldn't see. "And judicial!" Chloe shouted triumphantly. The crowd erupted. The applause was a physical wave of sound. Maria's voice crackled in my ear. "Great! Great take, Steve. Hand her the money, get the reaction shot, and we'll move on to the next." But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The cacophony of our celebration felt wrong. It felt disrespectful. I followed the old veteran's line of sight. He was staring at the flagpole atop the Civic Building. And as I watched, I saw it. The American flag was on its slow, solemn descent. 2 civil employees were methodically lowering it for the day, and then, faintly at first, but growing clearer as the crowd's cheers began to subside, I heard it. A single bugle. It was playing taps. This quiet, sacred daily ritual was happening just 100 feet from our noisy, frivolous game show, and only one person seemed to notice. This one man, standing alone, was paying his respects, offering a silent thank you to a symbol that clearly meant the world to him. My heart hammered against my ribs. In my ear, Maria was frantic. "Steve? What's going on? Steve, talk to the contestant. The crowd's getting confused." "What are you doing?" I ignored her. I ignored the confused look on Chloe's face. I ignored the $500 clutched in my hand. All I could see was that old man, his arm trembling slightly from the effort of holding the salute, his eyes unwavering. We were making noise. He was making a statement. Without thinking, without consulting anyone, I made a decision. I raised my left hand, not in a salute, but in a clear, unmistakable signal to my camera operator, Dave. "Cut," I said, my voice quiet but firm, not for the show's mic, but for my crew. "Stop taping. Everybody just stop." The cheers died instantly, replaced by a wave of confused murmurs. Dave lowered his camera, his face a mask of bewilderment. My sound guy pulled off his headphones. In my ear, Maria's voice went from frantic to furious. "Steve, what in the hell do you think you're doing? We are live to tape. You don't just stop." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound left was the hauntingly beautiful melody of the bugle echoing across the plaza. I turned away from the contestant, away from my crew, and took a step toward the old man. I had no idea what I was going to do or say. I just knew that our show wasn't the most important thing happening in that square right now. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The whole crowd was now staring, following my gaze to the veteran who hadn't moved an inch. And in that silence I realized I had just broken the biggest rule of television for a man I didn't even know. What was about to happen next, however, would break every rule I thought I knew about people. Maria's voice was a hornet in my ear. "Steve, I swear to God, if you've lost your mind on live television, your career is over. What is the matter with you? Talk to the girl. Give her the money. We are bleeding time and money here." But her voice was like static from a distant world. My world had shrunk to the space between me and this old soldier, a sacred pocket of silence in the middle of a bustling city. The final mournful notes of taps hung in the air, a melody of closure and remembrance. I couldn't walk towards him. That would be an intrusion. I couldn't go back to the game. That would be a desecration. So I did the only thing that felt right. I planted my feet, squared my shoulders, and slowly turned my body to face the flag, standing at a respectful, civilian version of attention. I wasn't a soldier. I hadn't earned the right to salute, but I could stand with one. I could share the silence. A ripple went through the crowd. It was a subtle shift, a collective intake of breath. The confused murmurs died, replaced by understanding. One by one, people lowered their phones. The sea of little blue screens that had been pointed at me and Chloe now vanished. The crowd turned almost as one, following my lead, their eyes finding the flag, finding the lone figure of the veteran. They saw what I saw. They felt what I felt. Then a single voice, soft but clear, pierced the quiet. "Oh, say, can you see?" It was a woman near the front, a mom with a stroller, her hand instinctively placed over her heart. Her voice was hesitant, unpolished, and utterly beautiful. For a second, she sang alone. Then a man next to her, a burly construction worker in a dusty T-shirt, joined in, his baritone rough but steady. Then two college kids, then a businessman loosening his tie. Within seconds, the entire plaza was singing. It wasn't a choir. It was a raw, spontaneous, perfectly imperfect chorus of strangers. Voices cracked with emotion. People hummed when they forgot the words, but they were all in it together. The sound swelled, bouncing off the granite buildings, a wave of reverence that washed over everything. It drowned out the distant traffic, the city's hum, and the frantic buzzing in my earpiece. I risked a glance at the veteran. He hadn't moved, his salute still locked in place. But I saw his shoulder shudder once, a tiny, self-contained earthquake. His back, if it were possible, seemed to straighten even more. The slight tremble in his saluting arm had vanished, replaced by a granite stillness, as if the voices of the crowd were a current of strength flowing directly into him. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a slow, deliberate path through the wrinkles on his cheek. He was no longer alone. Suddenly, Maria's voice was back, sharp and clear, but the fury was gone, replaced by an awestruck urgency. "Dave, get this. Get all of it. Push in on the old guy's face. Now. Harris, get your camera on the crowd. I want to see them singing. Steve, don't you dare move a muscle. Just stand there. We are rolling." The machine was back on, not to manufacture a moment, but to frantically capture a real one that had bloomed from nothing. The song reached its crescendo. "And the home of the brave." The final word hung in the air, powerful and defiant, just as the last note of taps faded completely. The flag was fully down, the ceremony complete. A profound silence fell once more, deeper and more meaningful than before. It held for a beat, 2 beats, and then the veteran's arm, with a slowness that spoke of immense effort and control, came down to his side. He stood there for a moment, his shoulders relaxing for the first time. Then he turned. His ancient, watery blue eyes scanned the crowd, the sea of faces still looking at him with awe and respect. His gaze finally landed on me. He took one step, then another, walking directly toward me. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, an aisle of silent respect opening up in their midst. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the faint outline of an old scar on his jaw. I could feel the entire city holding its breath. I braced myself for anything, a thank you, a rebuke for interrupting, anything. He cleared his throat, and the sound was amplified by the silence. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't place. He looked from my face to the crowd and back again, a deep, harrowing sadness in his eyes that seemed to completely contradict the beautiful thing that had just happened. He took a shaky breath and said the words that would turn this incredible moment into a profound mystery. "That was a kind thing to do. But that salute, that song, it wasn't for the flag." A collective, silent question mark seemed to hang in the air above the crowd. "Not for the flag?" The words echoed in my mind, nonsensical. We had all seen it. The flag, The bugle, his crisp salute. What else could it have been for? My producer's voice was a low, urgent hum in my earpiece. Steve, ask him. What does he mean? Keep him talking. For once, Maria and I were in perfect sync. I looked into his eyes, trying to comprehend. They were the color of a faded sky, and they held a depth of experience I could only guess at. "Sir," I began, my voice softer than my usual on-camera boom, "I'm not sure I understand." "We all saw you saluting the flag." He gave a slow, weary shake of his head. "The flag is a symbol. Important, yes, but a symbol is a vessel. It holds the memories. I was saluting the memory." He gestured with a trembling hand, not towards the flagpole, but towards the large bronze statue behind him, the one he'd been standing near. It was a generic monument to the city's founders, men in colonial garb looking stoically into the future. It seemed to have no relevance. "My name is George," he said, his voice gaining a bit of strength, as if saying his own name anchored him. "George Miller, 89 years old." He paused, looking around at the silent, attentive faces. 70 years ago today, to the minute, I was standing on another square. Not a nice, clean plaza like this one. It was a patch of dirt and mud in a place most people have forgotten. Korea. The word landed with a physical weight. Korea, the forgotten war. Suddenly, his age, his posture, his bearing, it all clicked into a sharper focus. This wasn't just an old man. He was a relic of a brutal, often overlooked conflict. "There were 5 of us," he continued, his gaze becoming distant, looking not at us, but through us, into the past. 5 kids from this very city. We all enlisted together, called ourselves the Plaza Boys because we used to hang around this very spot after school. He pointed a gnarled finger towards the statue. "Right there." We carved our initials into the base of that statue with a pocket knife. Figured we were leaving our mark before we went off to leave a different kind of mark on the world. The crowd was leaning in, a silent, city-sized family, listening to their grandfather's tale. Camera B was getting a slow, creeping shot of the statue's base, a detail that would be gold in the edit. "The war—" George's voice hitched, and he took a moment to compose himself. "It was not what we expected. It was cold. So cold the oil on your rifle would freeze solid. We were young, scared, but we had each other. That was the main thing, the Plaza Boys. We looked out for each other." He met my eyes again, and it felt like he was looking for a lifeline in the present. 70 years ago today, we were pinned down. An ambush. It was bad. Real bad. Our commanding officer, a good man named Lieutenant Davis, he was hit. We all were, in one way or another. But he was hit worst. We knew he wasn't going to make it. A hush fell that was so deep, so profound, it felt like the entire city had stopped breathing. The nursing student, Chloe, had tears streaming down her face. Even my hardened cameraman, Dave, was visibly moved, his focus on his shot, the only thing betraying his professionalism. "There was no flag," George rasped, his voice cracking. "No bugle, just mud and fear and the sound of gunfire. But Lieutenant Davis, he deserved the honor, he deserved the respect. So, as he lay there, we did what we could. One of us, a kid named Jimmy who played trumpet in the high school band, he whistled. He whistled, Taps! The image was so powerful, so heartbreaking, I could practically see it. 5 bloodied, terrified boys in the Korean mud, one of them whistling a final desperate farewell to their leader. "And the 4 of us who could still move," George continued, his own hand rising unconsciously, as if in a phantom salute. "We saluted him. As Jimmy whistled, we saluted our lieutenant goodbye." He held the imaginary salute for a moment, his eyes seeing a ghost in the middle of our modern plaza. His hand dropped back to his side. He was gone a moment later. He took a ragged breath. "I'm the only one left now, the last of the Plaza boys. Every year, on this day, at this time, I come back here, to this spot. I stand here, and I wait for the flag to come down. I wait to hear that bugle, and when it plays, I salute. But I'm not saluting the flag on that building." His voice dropped to a near whisper, laden with the weight of 70 years of grief and loyalty. "I'm saluting Lieutenant Davis. I'm saluting Jimmy and Frankie and Sal. I'm saluting my brothers." He finished, and the silence was a heavy blanket of shared sorrow and respect. The entire story recontextualized everything. The salute, the tear, the song. It had all been a beautiful, tragic misunderstanding. We thought we were sharing a patriotic moment, but we had stumbled into a private, sacred memorial. I felt a pang of guilt, as if our cameras and our show had intruded on something holy. I'm so sorry, George," I stammered, at a complete loss for words. "We had no idea." He waved a dismissive hand, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "It's all right, son. It's all right. In fact," he looked out at the crowd, at their tear-streaked faces, "it's the first time in 70 years I haven't had to salute them alone." Just then, a young woman, a city employee, timidly pushed her way through the crowd. She was holding the folded American flag that had just been lowered. She walked up to George, her expression one of profound reverence. "Sir," she said softly, "I think this belongs with you today." She held out the flag, a crisp, perfectly folded triangle of stars and stripes. George stared at the flag as if it were a holy relic. He reached out with both hands, his fingers trembling, and accepted it. He cradled it against his chest, his head bowed. The moment was so intensely personal, so poignant, I felt we should all just turn and walk away, leaving him to his grief and his memories. But then he looked up, his eyes locking onto something just over my shoulder, a flicker of disbelief and shock animating his tired features. His grip on the flag tightened, and his mouth fell open as he whispered a single impossible name. "Jimmy?" The name hung in the air, a ghost summoned into the sunlight. "Jimmy?" George repeated, louder this time, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and a desperate 70-year-old hope. My head whipped around, following his gaze. The crowd, sensing another seismic shift in this unfolding drama, parted once more. And there, standing not 20 feet away, was another old man. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his frame slighter than George's, his face a road map of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and fixed on George. He wore a faded VFW cap, identical to George's. "Georgie," the man rasped, his voice thin and reedy with age. "Is that really you?" A choked sob escaped George's lips. He took a staggering step forward, clutching the folded flag to his chest like a shield. "Jimmy, they told me you never made it out of the Chosin Reservoir." They told me you were lost on Heartbreak Ridge, Jimmy countered, taking a slow, pained step of his own. And then they met in the middle. Two old soldiers, two plaza boys, separated by 7 decades of misinformation and presumed loss, collapsing into each other's arms. It wasn't a powerful, cinematic embrace. It was a fragile, desperate clinging, a search for balance and belief. George's strong frame supported Jimmy's weaker one. They stood there, two stooped figures, weeping openly, patting each other's backs with the gentle, rhythmic thuds of men who had long forgotten how to offer physical comfort but remembered the instinct. The plaza, which had been so silent moments before, was now filled with a new sound, the soft, collective weeping of hundreds of strangers. My crew, my hardened, seen-it-all crew, was a wreck. Dave had the camera on his shoulder, but his face was turned away, his free hand wiping at his eyes. Maria was completely silent in my earpiece for the first time all day. Even the nursing student, Chloe, who had long forgotten about her $500, was sobbing into the shoulder of the burly construction worker, who had his arm around her in a gesture of shared humanity. "I looked for you," George mumbled into Jimmy's shoulder. "After the armistice, I spent months looking for your name on the lists. They told me you were MIA, presumed dead. My records got mixed up," Jimmy explained, his voice muffled by George's windbreaker. "I was in a hospital in Japan for almost a year. By the time I got back stateside, my family had moved. You were already discharged. I tried to find you, Georgie, I swear I did. But life just got in the way. 70 years of life. 70 years of separate families, jobs, joys, and sorrows, all lived under the shadow of a lie, of a brother lost in the snows of Korea. They finally pulled apart, holding each other at arm's length, their tear-filled eyes drinking in the sight of a face they thought they'd never see again. Jimmy looked down at the flag in George's arms. Were you saluting the lieutenant?" George nodded, unable to speak. A slow smile spread across Jimmy's face, a beautiful, heartbreaking sight. "I still whistle for him sometimes," he confessed softly. "When I'm alone, just to remember. It was too much. The moment was too perfect, too raw, too real. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond my role as a TV host, what had to happen next." I stepped forward, my own eyes blurring. "George? Jimmy?" I said, my voice thick. "You're not alone today." I turned to the crowd, to the sea of tear-streaked, compassionate faces. 70 years ago, I announced, my voice resonating across the now sacred ground, these men, these heroes, honored their fallen leader in the worst conditions imaginable. Today, they're together again, and I think we should all help them finish that salute. A wave of understanding and agreement rippled through the people. George and Jimmy looked at each other, then at me, confusion warring with a dawning comprehension on their faces. "That trumpet player in the crowd," I said, pointing towards a young street musician who had been watching from the sidelines. "Son, do you know how to play taps?" The young man, who couldn't have been more than 20, nodded solemnly, his trumpet already in his hands. I turned back to the two veterans. "And Chloe!" I called out, finding the nursing student in the crowd. She looked up, wiping her eyes. "Your $500. I think we can find a better use for it today, can't we?" She nodded enthusiastically, a beautiful, genuine smile breaking through her tears. We handed her prize money to the bugler, a spontaneous donation that felt more right than any trivia question ever could. As the young musician raised the trumpet to his lips, George and Jimmy, as if on instinct, turned towards the statue, the monument where they had carved their initials as boys. They stood side by side, brothers reunited, and as the first pure, clear note of taps rang out across the plaza for the second time that day, they both raised their hands. Two old soldiers, their salutes no longer trembling, no longer solitary. They were crisp, they were steady, and they were together. The crowd didn't sing this time. There was no need. We stood in reverent silence, every man, woman, and child, our hands over our hearts, sharing in a memorial 70 years in the making. We weren't an audience anymore. We were witnesses. Witnesses to a miracle of reunion, to a love between brothers that had transcended war and time. And as the final note faded, I knew that our silly little game show had accidentally captured something more profound and more beautiful than we could have ever scripted. A story not just of big hearts, but of immortal ones. The cameras were still rolling, but for the first time in my career, I had completely forgotten they were there.